All right, let's take a look at the remaining portions of using this rand function to come up with a density curve. One thing I'll note is because I was pulling between Excel and Word, the way that I pasted this over, it kind of copied the data. So when I went in here and cleaned up the data, I just deleted it out. It actually deleted my histogram here. So just be careful when you're doing this, whether it's on the activity or the project, paste it in a way or just use a screenshot so that when you change the values over here, it won't change them here. This should not be a problem if you're pasting into Google Docs from Excel, but it may be a problem if you're pasting from Sheets into Google Docs. So just kind of keep in mind, keep an eye on it. The other thing I wanted to mention, density curves, right? Density curves are supposed to be tracking probabilities. And what we've done so far, again, this data was removed, is look at frequencies. I'm going to show us what happens when we do this. But density curve should be looking at probabilities. So the curve, the general shape will be right, but the actual, the density curve should be using relative frequencies, not total. Okay, but let's do this part C. So we're going to choose a random number between 6 and 10. We talked about last time, the range there is 4, right? Just do the large number minus the small number, and that's your range. So we start off just the most basic thing. What's a number between 0 and 1? Okay, there's a rand function. And then we say, well, how do I change that? So what change do I make to the rand function to bump up the range? So all we have to do is multiply that rand. So I want a range of 4, so I'm going to do 4 times the rand function, and don't forget your equal sign here. And so this is going to give me a number between 0 and 4, right? Because if I multiply the lower bound, 0, if I multiply that by 4, it stays 0. If I multiply the upper bound, which is 1, if I multiply that by 4, I get an upper bound now of 4. So first address the range. And then we'll get here and we'll say, okay, but now I need to shift those numbers up by 6 because I've got numbers between 0 and 4. I'm going to bump that 0 up to a 6, bump that 4 up to a 10. So we're going to do 4 times rand, which we copied down, but then we're going to say plus 6. So we always have just these 2 elements for these types of problems. The first number is what I multiply by, that's the range. The second number is, okay, once I have the range, how much do I need to shift up or down? Okay, so here's a number between 6 and 10. I'm actually going to highlight that just to remind myself what numbers I'm using. And this time I may actually go a little bit farther and do more than 200 simulations. So this thing, we can drag this guy down. I'm going to go a little bit beyond the 200. Maybe we'll do about 300, somewhere in that ballpark. All right. Cool. And the formatting is going to come with it. If I color the first cell yellow, then the rest will come with it. The other thing is, right, we can highlight all this stuff. I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and the up arrow. That's going to go all the way to the top. If I don't want those first 2 values, which I certainly don't, I'm going to hold the Shift key and go down, down. So now it's got all my data here, or if I was starting up here, I could just do Control, Shift, or Command, Shift, depending on if you've got Mac or PC, and then click down, it'll highlight it all, right? So we don't have to spend a lot of time like dragging all the way down just to highlight. All right, then we can insert. We can either do recommended or histogram. Let's do recommended. And we see we've got histogram is one of the recommended charts. We should, again, change the chart title. So this is frequencies for random numbers between 6 and 10. Right, kind of a long title, but that's fine. And we know that we can change the axis title. So if I want to click on this plus and do axis titles, we can include that. So we can say this is the random number range, and this is the frequency, and this is the part I was talking about before. These are frequencies, how many times something happened. Well, we really should be talking about relative frequencies, what percent of the time something happened. So we may want to format this axis a little bit different. But there are quite a few steps in order to do that, so I'm not super worried about that for our purposes. So I'm going to leave this as just frequency. The other part of this is I just wanted to remind us we can certainly format things. So if we want to change the color, the fill here, so I'm going to change it to this like salmony, maybe pukey I don't know, pink color. The outline on there, if I want to make that a little bit more stark, you can do that. All right, so it's a little bit more clear what's going on. There are other things that you can kind of manipulate in there, but that's fine enough. We also know, right, we can format this and say, well, how many bins do we want? 7 bins is kind of a weird number, so let's say we go with like, usually we do even numbers unless it's like 5 or 15. So let's say I wanted, I don't know, 6 bins. All right, we take a look at this and we go, yep, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to copy this over, Control-C or Command-C, come over here. And when I paste this is what I was talking about as far as you got different sort of options as far as how these are going to paste. So I'm going to paste mine as a picture. And let's see if I make some change in here so we know that if we do anything with the rand function, it's going to change this picture. Notice it did not change it over here. So I pasted it as a picture so it wouldn't change. All right. As far as the density curve shape, again, this is not a proper density curve, but this is the right shape. We look at this and we go, okay, well, it looks like we kind of have like roughly this horizontal line here, which is what we saw for the other ones. And that's pretty much what we should get. Okay, then the last part of this is looking at 2 numbers chosen between 0 and 1, and then we're going to add them, right? So this is slightly different because, right, 2 numbers, adding them. So we're not really changing the numbers between 0 and 1. We certainly could, right? We could say like, well, now that I know how to choose a number between 6 and 10, I can do that twice and then add them together. But in this case, right, we're just going to say, all right, keep it simple. So 2 numbers between 0 and 1. I'm just going to go to a fresh sheet here. So we know how to do one of these numbers, rand. Done. So I could do another one of these, right? I could say, well, what if I do 2 of these, right? This is also just going to be rand. So both of those are between 0 and 1. And then I could use my sum function, or I could just add these. But I'm going to use the sum function to add those 2. The nice thing about this, I can just drag this down, right? So these ones should just be some rands, which we see in the formula bar. These ones should all be sums, and if I check one of those, it's just referencing the cells next to it. So relative references. So these would be the ones that I want, right? These sums. Whoops, sorry about that. These guys. And you could also just do this in one cell, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But since we're here, let's say we are simulating, again, I don't know, maybe 300 of these. Oops, I should have grabbed them all because we just have zeros on there. So yeah, I should have grabbed all these guys, right? All 3 of them, and I can drag them down. There we go. Awesome, that looks better. And now I can say, well, let me trap all these ones in yellow. So Control-Shift up, and I'm going to insert my, well, we can try recommended again, but we're going to see histogram on there. So here's our histogram. Now this one does not look like the other ones, right? It doesn't look like the best curve is a horizontal line. It looks like there's a major peak in the middle, and then it's small on the sides. Well, this is kind of like what we've done with dice in the past, right? The smallest numbers and the biggest numbers, those are really unlikely outcomes. The numbers in the middle are much more likely. So we can say, okay, well, maybe this was a fluke. Let's try something else. So I'm just going to change something in my sheet and see if that changes the shape. Nah, the shape's kind of the same. Let me change something else. Okay, shape's kind of the same. Change something else. Right, so we can kind of do this all the live long day. We see it change. It does change a little bit, but really we're seeing the same basic idea, which is there's a peak in the middle, and we have these lower values on the sides. So we could change, right? Of course, the chart title, the fill, all of that good stuff that we just talked about. Add, again, remind ourselves this little plus is going to add axis titles if we would like. If we want to change something else, we can do that. But I'm just going to copy this guy over. Control-C. Come over here and paste it as a picture so that I don't have to worry about it changing. And then as far as the density curve goes, here's what the density curve looks like for this one. It's not actually like a nice smooth curve, but actually very rigid. So we go up to a peak here, and then we go down here. And let's think about it. What's the most likely sum? Well, we have all these numbers between 0 and 1 getting added. So the smallest, right, would be a 0 and a 0. So that's over here, 0, which is almost impossible. The largest would be if both numbers were 1. So 1 plus 1 would be 2. That's way over here. So that's basically impossible, right? 0 and 2, it's nearly impossible. There's only one way to get it. And because these are not just whole numbers, right, decimals and stuff like that, very, very unlikely you would get those. So what's smack dab in the middle? 1, right? 1 is right in the middle. You can't quite see it here because our ranges aren't showing in full, but we could adjust those. We can make those a little bit more clear, certainly. But yeah, this is basically the idea is we expect, right, kind of on average, that each of these is right in the middle. We kind of expect to get 0.5 and 0.5. But of course that doesn't happen. Like one number could be 0.6 and 0.4. We could have 0.3 and 0.7. This is only to emphasize how many ways there are to make 1, but there's only one way to make 0. There's only one way to make 2. So this middlemost number, 1, is the most likely number to come out. The other numbers start getting less likely as you move away from that, right? And of course, I used really nice numbers. We could have 0.555 plus 0.445, right? That's another way to make 1. So tons of ways, infinitely many, in fact. Okay, and then if we really wanted to make this a density curve, we would not be using these frequencies, right? Again, we'd say relative frequencies. We can still kind of hack this a little bit. So if we wanted to say, well, what if I just wanted to draw it for myself below here? What if I wanted the proper density curve? Well, let's see. Here's 2. Here's 1. Sorry, my axis is a little bit curved. We know that the shape looks something like this. And we know that the area is supposed to be 1, right? It's a density curve. So this is a triangle, right? We see a big old triangle. So here's my height. Here's my base. So what's my base? It's 2. And the area is 1, but this is supposed to be area of a triangle. And you want to remember 1/2 base times height, right? Well, okay. That means 1 equals 1/2. The base is 2. And we get the height. Oh wait, 1/2 times 2. Those cancel out. That's just 1. So the height equals 1. Holy cow. Right? So 1 is equal to h. That means this goes up to 1. And you could double check, see that this actually works out. But that's kind of the idea behind making a proper density curve here, because now we're talking about relative frequency. Okay. Cool, that's the major idea with the rand function, manipulating those, adding those. So hopefully that was kind of helpful. And again, make sure you are playing along with this as I go through it. Make these charts, work on these random functions. It's the only way to get better at these is to do them.